let's start with the contrast, both the stylistic contrast. When you see President Obama standing there saying, you know, essentially all is well. We've rebuilt the economy. We've rebuilt our stature around the world. And you watch Donald Trump finishing his thank you tour. He's still campaigning on, forgive my shorthand, but that all is hell, that Washington's a mess, that the economy's a mess, and that we need this dramatic change. But particularly, Dan, on this question of Russia. Of the people who've received the intelligence briefings, I believe that Donald Trump is alone in still refusing to say something happened. There's a debate about how high it went at the Kremlin. There's a debate about, you know, what to do about it. But now you have Republicans saying we need to have hearings. You have the President of the United States saying the evidence is overwhelming. And Donald Trump still says, I don't think it happened.
He is an outlier on this. I mean, we don't know what some of the people who are closest to him who will populate the new administration are saying to him about this, but certainly in any public comments, he's alone in being unwilling to accept the view that this was done by the Russians, and the latest conclusion that it was done to help him and to hurt Hillary Clinton. And it's a very odd situation that he can't sort of wrap his head around the idea that this is what actually happened, because the evidence does seem overwhelming and the conclusions are widely shared. And the question is, will there be any kind of a change of heart or any kind of a change of view once he becomes president of the United States? Because this is going to fall into his lap.
And that was the point the president seemed to be making there, where he just repeatedly said, I've seen the evidence. The evidence is there. I've seen the evidence. But he seemed to try to be giving the president-elect some grace, saying, election just over, transition period. He's, you know, sort of learning up. And I don't mean that as a criticism. You're learning up to the job. It's a hard job to take on. Seemed to be trying to give him a nudge, but also some grace.
Right, and I think that's why you're going to see the president has ordered the intel community to put forward a public report that will be out before he leaves office, which he can then hand over to Trump. I think what's interesting about the way that Trump is handling this is that he is viewing this hack of the Democratic groups as through the prism of his own election. Maybe his tone will change after we get to Monday, when the electors will officially cast their votes, and then there will be no debate over whether he's going to be president. But when you actually take office, you can't view these issues in terms of how they relate to you. You have to view them in terms of how they relate to the country, our own national security, events around the world. And whether he's able to make that shift, I think, will really tell the story of his presidency.
Well, in your piece today, Dan, you talk about how he campaigned on America first, and you could make the argument here, again, shorthanding, but he's putting almost Kremlin first in criticizing the CIA. Why? Why does some people around him, when you talk to them, say, you know, he'll get there. But why? Is this ego? He doesn't want to say, oh, I got some help in the election? Is it this affinity for Putin, or just willing to ignore some things, even if he believes them to be true, not say so publicly because he thinks there's some new page turn coming?
Well, look, the one thing intelligence agencies do differ on is the conclusion of whether Russia meddled to specifically help Donald Trump and hurt Hillary Clinton. That's one area where the CIA has been more forward-leaning than other agencies have been. And that seems to be the issue that Donald Trump and his advisors are sort of laying their hat on. They are offended by this conclusion. They feel like it is an opportunity and a way for people to delegitimize his presidency, which is ironic, coming from the guy who spent years insisting President Obama was not born in the United States. And, you know, many saw that as a way to delegitimize President Obama. But that is what they are hanging on. And I think that they will continue to do that until we actually see the electors vote. Whether Donald Trump changes his tone beyond that is an open question, but honestly, we have not seen this. We have not seen it publicly from Sean Spicer, who did interviews over the weekend and declined to talk about sort of the risks of Russia. We even saw Chris Collins, a congressman, out there saying, you know, if Russia hacked the DNC, then the worst thing that happened was the truth came out. This is a very different tone, I think, than we would see from Republicans if it was flipped.
Yeah,
if Republicans were saying this, or if this had happened to Republicans, I think that they would be saying that Democrats were treasonous for latching on to conclusions this way.
That's a pretty safe bet, I think. No, I mean, everything's tribal now and partisan, so they're trying to accommodate their principal, their president. And so it's causing them to get into all these sort of contortions to try to rationalize what he's saying. Part of me wants to think that, to Julie's point, that he is reluctant to admit that this was the Russians because that would cast some shadow on his victory. But here's the problem with that. He's been unwilling to challenge Putin well before this. Right. One of the biggest mysteries of this campaign was, for a year and a half, whenever he was asked about Putin or Russia, his tone changed, his demeanor changed, his language changed. Right. I mean, like no other country in the world would he somehow try to rationalize or sort of couch his comments. But whenever it was Russia and Putin, he was just always different. And that's why there are these lingering questions.
Let's listen to some of that. Let's listen to some of that, because he, as a candidate, a lot of candidates say things as a candidate, then they have very different views, they learn in the transition, then they become president, they have to actually deal with the problem. So we'll see what President Trump does. But candidate Trump, you're right, was pretty friendly toward Putin.
But there's nothing I can think of that I'd rather do than have Russia friendly as opposed to the way they are right now, so that we can go and knock out ISIS together with other people and with other countries.
I'm not a friend of Putin. I don't know Putin. I've never met Putin. I respect Putin. He's a strong leader, I can tell you that, unlike what we have.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
That is noteworthy for a number of reasons. Number one, he urged a foreign government to hack into American institutions. Number two, that was the last time he had a press conference back in the campaign. But look, we're questioning. We have these questions about the hacking and what we're going to learn in these investigations. Both the internal administration. In a few moments, we'll get to the Republicans on Capitol Hill and how they want to come at this. But to me, it's the bigger question of what a change we're going to get in 33 days, in the sense that if you listen to President Obama at his news conference, he was essentially, he doesn't use John McCain's words, but he says, Putin can't be trusted. Putin has blood on his hands in what's happening in Aleppo right now. Putin annexed Crimea. Putin stole land from Georgia. That why can you do not have a romanticized view of this guy, but he thinks Trump does.
And Obama is speaking as someone who tried to have a better relationship with Russia when he first came into office. Putin was not president at the time,
As did George W. Bush.
As George W. Bush, but Putin was still very influential. No one argues with what Trump is saying about wanting to have a better relationship with Russia, being able to address some of these issues more easily if there was a more productive relationship. But saying that shouldn't wipe away all that we know about what Putin has done. Ukraine, Crimea is the most obvious example right now, but if you look at Syria, if Russia were taking more action and were not propping up Assad, we would be talking about a very different situation there. So it's as though he is choosing to ignore all of this evidence about what Russia is doing to destabilize places around the world in favor of a positive relationship, when I think he could be talking about both.